highway as you cross the Macleay River Bridge into central Kempsey. And that store, the photograph taken in 1911, shows on the title of the store not my grandfather's name, Tim Keneally, but my grandmother's name, Katie Keneally. And I wrote an entire novel called A River Town based just on that photograph. I made up a version, I interviewed my parents, I made up a version of what happened to change that letter. And of course there's murder, racial hatred, domestic passions, ghosts, little self-destructive girls, all sorts of stuff in the novel. You drag all that in, you drag all the lies you can possibly think of into a novel. So that novel didn't need a lot of research. The only other bit of research I did is you go to newspapers, you read the newspapers, you look at the clothes people wore, you read the editorials to get the attitudes of people, you look at the clothes they wore, the patent medicines they took. I don't know if any of you are, I'm just old enough, and God knows I'm old enough, to remember that in the papers of my childhood, there were fantastical patent medicines advertised, which claimed to cure everything from constipation to cancer, you know. And these were, there were a lot of advertisements for worm medicine. Apparently, humans, if you read the papers of 1900, were full of parasitic worms, you know. And there were testimonials from Mrs. Finlay of Canandra saying, thanks to Dr. Holliday's magic worm pills, I extruded a worm 4 foot 5 inches long, etc. Someone else would write in and say, that's nothing. My Uncle Bill took Holloway's magic worm pills and extruded, etc. But others require a great deal of research. And again, some of it is book, and some of it is library, other people's libraries, the state's libraries or the federal libraries, and some of it is documentation you can get online. For example, both for this history of Australia, which I'm correcting here, and for a novel that I've just finished, which will be out next year and is called Daughter of Mars. It's still called Daughters of Mars. It's about World War I nurses, and it's about their girls from the bush and their education in the scale and the horror of things, and of course their education in the contempt big military organizations then had for women. In writing that, I had the online history of the medical services in World War I, which is fascinating, because it told you how a casualty clearing station about, say, 7 miles behind the line, which had nurses working in it, told you how it worked, and they told you about the special, there's a wonderful section in the history called Special Problems, Special Medical and Surgical Problems of the Great War. They developed methods to stop men dying of shock, and they're very interesting. And they developed methods to deal with the horror of gas, which attacked every membrane in the inhaler's body, attacked the mustard gas, whether it was mustard, which was a burning gas, whether it was phosgene, which attacked the mucous membranes, whatever gas it was, in every convoy load of men who arrived at a casualty clearing station were a proportion of men who were suffering gas inhalation or gas burns, and they had to be treated too. So a lot, ultimately, when this book's published, I'll put a few nurses' journals up there, but a lot of them are unpublished. And I use them as well. So behind the research library up there is a phantom library of documents, of memoirs, and so on. And I think I might, if the School of Arts, Mechanics Institute and School of Arts Library want them, I might put some of those documents up there so people see that when you're writing a heavily researched book, you don't just use the books that are there. One of the biggest collections is of Irish history, and there are a lot of, because I wrote a book some years ago called The Great Shame, and The Great Shame was about the social ills of Ireland at the time convicts were sent to Australia, both overtly political convicts and ordinary convicts who had committed shoplifting, butter theft, stock theft. Ned Kelly's father stole a pig. Various such crimes occurred, in particular in the summer, in England and Ireland. And using the convicts as a kind of data, stream of data for the land problems of Ireland, its injustices and so on, was something I wrote a book about some years ago, but I became particularly fascinated by a group of people called the Young Islanders. Now, the Young Islanders were a group of middle-class Irish gents, some of the best of backgrounds. One was a member of the House of Commons for 15 years. His name was William Smith O'Brien. He used to be treated very dismissively by the guides at Port Arthur because he was at Port Arthur in genteel solitary confinement in his own hut. And his hut's still there. But he was 15 years in the House of Commons, and he refused to take cabinet positions, though he was frequently, round about every term of Parliament, he was offered them. He was the son of a baronet. The family house in the west of Ireland is now a luxury hotel and golf course. So he was not an inestimable man, and he was the head of the Young Islanders. Now, he is a fascinating figure. He led an abortive uprising at the height of the famine, and it was all based on the fact that, as happens in every famine, as happened in Ethiopia, as happens in most famines, there are export and other business going on within the starving country. For example, in Ethiopia, at the height of the famine, Mengistu, the Ethiopian dictator, was arming his army in a way that spending money that the Australian government never spends on. The reason we have a small army is so that our money can be spent on other things like roads and hospitals, unsatisfactory as they may be. And so that our taxes can be kind of reasonable. But Mengistu was spending his people's and his nation's substance on the war against the Tigrayans and the Eritreans, the Tigrayans are the Scots of Ethiopia, and the Eritreans were, well, the Irish or the Welsh or whatever. And he was spending a fortune on this, these materials of war. I wrote a book about that once called Tu Asmara, actually. I think there's a copy of it upstairs. But so whether it's Ireland, there's always funny stuff going on with the government's money, or the government's, or the official produce, or the harvest, even at the height of famines. And of course, there is sometimes food corruption. And the last thing I wanted to do was talk people off donating to aid bodies, because that's the wrong solution. But there are always things that sometimes the aid agency doesn't even dare let you know what's going on for fear that it might inhibit donations. And it shouldn't inhibit donations to know the truth, but they think it might.